Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Alright, so now that we have the wheel off of here, let's continue on to the axle nut. To remove this, I'm going to use a 32mm socket. After you have the nut removed, continue on with a hammer and a punch. We're going to come right into the center area here, give this a couple loving bonks to break it free from the wheel bearing. Now what we're going to do is come right up here to the upper mounting point for the sway bar link. If you look in the center of this stud right here, you can see there's an area to be able to put in an Allen head socket. Ours, as you can tell, is completely stripped out, so I'm just going to go ahead and use some locking pliers. I'm going to come right along the backside and try to grab right onto the shaft of the sway bar link itself. Now let's just use an 18mm socket to remove our nut. Alright, now this is nice and loose. We can start removing the sway bar link from this area and go ahead and hang it aside. Now at that point, you'd want to go ahead and do the same on the other side of the vehicle. Now that we've broken the axle free, let's make our way to the lower ball joint. You're going to find a cotter pin of some sort. We're just going to go ahead and remove that. Pull that right out of there, set that aside for recycling. Now we can remove the ball joint nut. We'll use our 18mm socket. Now that we have the nut off of there, the next thing that we want to do is start separating the lower control arm from the knuckle. Of course, there's a ball joint in between. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my hammer. I'm going to give this a couple loving bonks to cause some vibration, and essentially I'm going to do that and try to pull down on this control arm at the same time. Alright, that broke free. Our ball joint boot came off as well, but generally you can just squeeze that right back up on there. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt right along here. To do this, I'm going to hold the top nut with a 24mm and I'll come down here with a 21 to remove the bolt. Once I have it nice and loose, I'll leave it as is and move ahead to the next. Now we can go ahead and start removing this bolt right here. I'm just going to go ahead and take the nut off up top. Now we can start prying this down and out of here. Next, we're going to come to the forward bolt right here. As you can tell, there isn't very much room between the bolt head and the transmission. I'm going to go ahead and start removing this with my 21mm wrench. Now at this point, we can go ahead and grab onto the sway bar. We'll go ahead and lift this right up. And that gets it out of the way so we can start removing the control arm from the subframe. To do that, I'm going to use a nice pry bar. Carefully get in between the subframe and the control arm. Gently start prying to separate the two. Now I'm just going to go ahead and grab onto this rearward aspect. We're going to try to twist this a little bit. Alright, and now hopefully we should be able to get our bolt out of there. I feel like I just have it. There it is. There it is, friends. Now let's take some red thread locker. We're going to go ahead and put it right on the mounting bolts for the control arm here. All right, now it's going to be time to install our brand new lower control arm. Let's have a look at those bolts. The shorter of the two bolts is going to be the forward one. The longer bolt is going to be for the hockey puck in the rear. Let's see if we can get this at the right angle. Okay. Now let's go ahead and get the ball joint into position on the control arm. Slide it right in there. Now let's start putting in this rearward bushing. As you can tell, it looks like it's a little bit off kilter, but we're still going to have to try to drive this right in here. So all I'm going to do is use a nice rubber mallet, give it a couple loving bonks to get it in position. Now the next thing we're going to do is carefully get our bolt up and into this hole as far as possible. Now I'm going to hold that in position. We'll put a jack right underneath the control arm here. We're going to start bringing this up so it's in an almost level position. So hopefully this lines up. We can finish putting our bolt through. All right, get that bolt up inside there. If for some reason you're having a hard time getting this lined up, you could try just using a ratchet strap, kind of the way that I have it here. Essentially, we just want to be trying to pull the arm in as far as we can to be able to get that hole lined up. Now I went ahead and I removed the strap from under this area, but I did leave the jack underneath this. Essentially the reason why is because as I start tightening this, I want to have it in the ride height position. So essentially all the weight of the vehicle is pressing down, and this control arm would be up a little bit and not necessarily hanging down. So now at this point, we have this bolt completely started in. It's still a little bit loose. So what I want to do is just take the jack. I'm going to go back underneath this control arm here. I'm going to lift this back up and into ride height position. So essentially it's pretty much parallel with the ground. Then we'll come up here and we can start tightening up our bushings. Now we can go ahead and tighten this. Now we can make our way back here, snug this one as well. Now we're going to torque the front bolt to 129 foot-pounds. Now let's torque this rearward bolt to 107 foot-pounds. Now we can go ahead and put on our ball joint nut. We'll bottom this out. And now we'll torque this to 70 foot-pounds. Now the next thing you want to do is pay attention to the hole that's in the stud for the ball joint and of course the slot of the nut. We want to make sure that they match up so you can get your cotter pin in there to lock it in. If it isn't, go ahead and continue tightening the nut until the very next slot does. Once it's lined up, go ahead and put in your locking cotter pin. Make sure you pin it over to lock this down. Remove your jack. Now we'll get this down and into position. I'm going to go ahead and turn the wheel. We'll bottom this out and torque this to 35 as well. If you find that when you're trying to tighten the nuts, the stud wants to spin, just go ahead and grab yourself an Allen head socket. This is a size 5. I'm going to go ahead and put this on here. We'll also use a ratchet wrench, and we'll, of course, we'll hold the stud while we turn this clockwise to tighten it. Now, obviously, you would do the same on the other side of the vehicle. Okay, so now we can get ready to put our axle nut on here. Whenever I put on my axle nut, I always, of course, make sure there's some red thread locker on the axle. Then I'm just going to go ahead and put this on. We'll go ahead and snug this up by hand with a ratchet, and then we'll just go ahead and torque it to 181 foot-pounds. Now to torque this, you can either have somebody go ahead and stand on the brake to prevent the rotor from wanting to spin, or if you wanted to, you could just use a pry bar, carefully coming in between some of the studs. We can go ahead and turn this to lock it in. Now we'll torque this to 181. Alright, so now we can go ahead and get the wheel on here. We're going to start on all 5 of our lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel back firmly on the ground, we can go ahead and torque these to 100 foot-pounds.